The night was quiet, except for the sound of leaves moving in the cold wind. John sat on his porch, sipping a warm drink, while his dog, Max, wandered near the forest. It was almost midnight, and the air felt heavy. Max suddenly froze, ears standing up, then barked sharply. John frowned. "What is it, boy?" But Max didn't stop. Instead, he ran deeper toward the trees, barking louder. John set down his cup and grabbed a flashlight. He didn't like going into the forest at night. Too many shadows. Too many unknowns, but Max was family. And when he barked like that, it meant something was wrong. The beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness, showing twisted roots and damp ground. John followed the barking, his boots crunching on the cold dirt. "Max?" He called again. No answer, only the sound of barking, urgent and fierce. Finally, the light caught sight of him. Max stood still, tail low, body tense, guarding something small on the ground. John's steps slowed. It wasn't an animal. It was a shape, curled up like a child. The figure shivered, covered in dirt. John took a careful step closer. His light revealed pale skin, not human pale, but faintly glowing under the beam. The hair was long and tangled, with a faint shimmer. As if touched by moonlight, she was thin, too thin, her knees drawn up to her chest. Two large, glowing eyes looked up at him, eyes that were not human. They were deep silver, with faint rings moving inside. Like water ripples, John froze. His first thought was, is this real? But then, the small figure moved. Her lips trembled, and she spoke. The voice was soft, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. One word, clear and full of emotion. "Dad." The word hit John like a hammer. He had no idea who she was, or how she could speak English. She stared at him, not blinking, as if waiting for him to say something. He knelt down slowly, keeping his voice calm. "Hey, it's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." But she didn't move away. In fact, she leaned forward slightly, as if trusting him already. Max wagged his tail now. Standing between them protectively, John reached out a hand. She hesitated, then placed her small, cold fingers in his. Her touch was strange light, almost weightless, but warm at the center. He pulled her gently to her feet. She stumbled, legs weak, without thinking. John scooped her up. She was so light it felt like carrying a bundle of clothes as they walked back toward the house. John glanced at her. Her strange eyes stayed on his face, unblinking every step he took. She held on tighter. Max walked close, as if guarding both of them when they reached the porch. John noticed how her eyes widened at the sight of the warm lights from inside. She whispered something in her own language, soft and musical, but he couldn't understand. Inside, John set her down on the couch. She looked around, slowly, as if she had never been inside a home before. When he offered her a blanket, she touched it gently. Surprised by the softness, Max sat by her side. Pressing against her legs for warmth, John brought her a glass of water. She drank in quick, small sips, then gave him a faint smile. It was the first human-like expression he had seen from her. "Who are you?" he asked softly. She tilted her head, as if thinking about the answer. Then she repeated that same word, even softer this time. "Dad?" Her voice cracked a little, as if she was afraid he would reject her. John felt something stir inside he had no idea where she came from, but she was scared, hungry, and alone. He couldn't just send her away, not tonight. She curled up on the couch, still holding the blanket close. Her glowing eyes followed him as he moved around the room. Before long, her eyelids grew heavy. Just as she drifted into sleep, she whispered again, "They'll come for me." Her voice was trembling. John stopped. "Who?" he asked, but she didn't answer. She was already deep asleep. Max lifted his head, ears twitching, and gave a low growl toward the dark window. Outside, the wind carried a strange sound, almost Like footsteps far away, John slowly locked the door, his mind turning with questions. He didn't know what he had just brought into his home. But one thing was certain, something or someone was out there, and they were looking for her. Morning sunlight crept through the curtains. John woke with a stiff neck. Still sitting in the armchair, Max lay by his feet, but his eyes were open, watching the couch. The little alien girl was still there, wrapped tightly in the blanket. Her silver eyes peeked out, cautious but curious. John rubbed his face and stood. She flinched slightly at the movement, as if she expected danger. "It's okay," he said softly, raising his hands in peace. She relaxed, but her gaze stayed fixed on him. Max wagged his tail and trotted over to her. Resting his head on her knees, her small fingers sank into his fur, and for the first time she let out a tiny laugh. It was so quick and shy that John almost missed it. "Hungry?" he asked, pointing toward the kitchen. She tilted her head, unsure. He mimed eating, and she nodded slowly. In the kitchen, John cooked eggs and toast, simple food. He set the plate in front of her. She stared at it like it was treasure. Then, carefully, she picked up a piece of toast and took a bite. Her eyes widened at the taste, and she ate the rest quickly. When she finished, she held the plate out politely, almost like she was asking permission for more. "You can have as much as you want," John said, smiling. She didn't smile back, but her eyes softened a little. He noticed her clothes, if they could be called, that were torn and dirty. Thin strips of strange fabric hung loosely from her small frame. It wasn't enough to keep her warm. "I'll find you something better to wear," he said. She didn't respond, but she didn't resist when he brought a clean t-shirt and small sweatpants. She disappeared into the bathroom and a few minutes later came out wearing them. The clothes were too big, but she held them up with both hands, looking almost proud. John knelt down. "What's your name?" She blinked, then spoke a word in her language, soft flowing, impossible for him to repeat exactly. He tried anyway, stumbling over the sound. She giggled, shaking her head, then pointed to him and said clearly, "Dad." John exhaled slowly. "You really think I'm your dad, huh?" She nodded. Serious this time, he didn't know whether to correct her or not, so he let it go. Outside, the forest was quiet again. Too quiet, John thought. He had lived here for years. He knew the normal sounds of the woods, birds, wind, sometimes deer. But now it felt watched. He tried not to let it show, but the girl seemed to sense it too. Every time a branch snapped outside, her shoulders tensed. Later, John stepped onto the porch to feed Max. The cold air bit at his skin as he poured food into the bowl. Something caught his eye, a set of footprints in the dirt. Leading away from the porch toward the trees, they were large, clawed, and not from any animal he knew. His stomach tightened. Someone had been here during the night. When he returned inside, he found the girl sitting very still, staring at the door. Her hands gripped the blanket tightly. "They came," she whispered. John froze. "Who?" She hesitated, then said, "Bad people. They take children. Like me." Her voice was shaking now. "They hurt us, keep us in cages. I ran. Max found me." John glanced at his dog, who stood proudly, as if understanding every word. John knew then if she was telling the truth. Taking her to the authorities might only return her to the ones chasing her. He didn't know how deep this went. But he knew one thing. She was safer with him than out there, the rest of the day. John tried to keep things normal. They watched cartoons together, though she didn't understand much. Max stayed by her side constantly. She seemed fascinated by everything: light switches, soft cushions, even the ticking of the wall clock. But whenever the wind blew too hard, she would flinch. Whenever shadows moved outside, her eyes would dart to the window. By evening, John had decided to set up the guest room for her. It was Warmer there, with a smaller window and a lock on the door. When he showed her, she tilted her head in surprise, then ran her small hands over the bedspread. It was as if she had never touched something soft before. She climbed onto the bed, sinking into the mattress with a content sigh, then looking up at him, she said, "Dad, stay." John hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed, Max curled up on the floor beside them, keeping watch. "Sleep now," John said gently. Her eyes closed slowly, but before she drifted off, she whispered again, "They'll come for me." John's jaw tightened. "Not while I'm here," he promised, but even as he said it, he knew the night might bring trouble, outside, far in the forest. Faint lights began to glow between the trees. They moved slowly, almost like they were searching, and somewhere in the distance, something let out a low, unnatural growl. The night air was cold. John sat in the dark living room, only the dim glow of the lamp beside him. Max lay near the door, ears twitching at every sound. In the guest room, the alien girl slept under the blanket, her small breaths slow and steady. John should have been resting too, but his mind was restless. Those strange lights in the forest wouldn't leave his thoughts. A soft noise came from outside, a crunch of leaves. Max's head snapped up, a low growl rumbling from his chest. John reached for the shotgun by the door. He moved quietly, lifting the curtain just enough to peek outside. At first, he saw nothing. Then, movement. A shadow slipped between the trees, tall and hunched. Another followed, and another. They weren't moving like hunters, they were moving like searchers, scanning the area. John's grip on the shotgun tightened. He backed away from the window and went to the guest room. The girl was awake, her glowing eyes wide and fearful. "They're here," she whispered, before he could say a word. "How do you know?" he asked. Her lips trembled. "I can feel them. They are looking for me." John thought about running right then, but where? The nearest neighbor was miles away, and in the dark, with unknown creatures in the woods, it would be dangerous, for now. Staying inside might be safer. Max stood at the door, growling louder now. Then came the sound, a slow scrape against the wooden doorframe. John froze. It wasn't knocking, it was testing, like someone wanted to see if the door would open. He moved silently, checking the locks. The girl crouched in the corner, clutching the blanket like a shield. Her breathing was fast. Panicked, John knelt beside her, whispering, "It's all right, I'm here." But her eyes darted toward the door, and she shook her head. "No. They will take me away." A shadow passed across the small window, blocking the moonlight for a moment. Max barked, sharp and angry. The shadow paused, then moved away. John exhaled slowly, too slowly, because a second later, the sound of footsteps came from the back of the house. They were circling, hunting. John quickly guided the girl to a small closet in the hallway. "Stay here with Max," he whispered. Max didn't move, but his eyes locked on John, as if asking if this was safe. John nodded, then slipped toward the back door. The night outside was thick and silent. His breath puffed in the cold air. He scanned the yard with the flashlight, the beam cutting through fog, and there, half hidden behind the shed, stood a figure. Its body was thin, but unnaturally long. Its head was tilted, as if listening. When the light touched it, it didn't flinch. Instead, it took a slow step forward. The skin was a dull gray, stretched tight, and its eyes, small and black, were locked on him. John raised the shotgun. "Not another step," he warned. The creature tilted its head again, then spoke in a low, raspy voice that John didn't understand. Before he could react, another shadow moved behind him. He turned, firing into the dark. The blast echoed through the trees, scattering the figures for a moment. He ran back inside, slamming the door and locking it. Max was already out of the closet, standing guard in front of the girl. "They were here, weren't they?" she asked, voice trembling. John nodded. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They will keep coming until they find me." He sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. His mind was racing. He couldn't wait for them to attack again. If they were hunting her, they wouldn't give up. He had two choices: run now and try to hide, or fight back. Max barked once, sharp and urgent. John followed his gaze toward the window. Far away, in the tree line, the strange lights had returned. But this time, they were moving faster, spreading out. The hunt had begun. The girl clutched his arm. "Please, don't let them take me." John looked into her silver eyes, and something inside him hardened. "No one's taking you," he said firmly, and in that moment, it wasn't just a promise, it was a decision. Somewhere outside, a metallic sound echoed like a door to something large being opened. Then came the low hum, deep and unnatural, vibrating through the ground. The girl's eyes filled with tears. They brought a catcher. She whispered, "If it touches me, I can't escape." John didn't know what a catcher was, but he knew one thing: if they had a special machine to capture her, it meant they were getting desperate. And desperate hunters were dangerous. He checked the shotgun, reloaded, and looked at Max. The dog wagged his tail once. "Ready?" John turned to the girl. "We're leaving now." She hesitated, fear clear on her face. But when Max nudged her leg gently, she nodded. They moved quickly, John grabbing a backpack, water, and a few supplies. The girl kept close, holding onto his shirt. As they stepped onto the porch, John glanced back at his house. It looked normal in the moonlight, but he knew it would never be the same again. Somewhere in the dark, unseen eyes were watching. And as they headed toward the old logging road, the low hum of the catcher grew louder. It was only a matter of time before the real chase began. The moonlight painted the forest in silver and black. John led the way down the old logging road, his flashlight sweeping the ground. Max trotted ahead, stopping every few steps to sniff the air. The alien girl stayed close to John's side, holding on to the hem of his jacket. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, scanning the trees. They had been walking for nearly an hour. The cold bit through John's clothes, but he kept moving. Every so often, he heard that low hum again, far away, but never gone. It was like the sound was following them. He didn't want to stop until they found a place to hide. Finally, they reached an old hunting cabin. It looked abandoned, roof sagging, door crooked, windows broken. But it was shelter. John pushed the door open, dust filling the air. Inside was empty except for a table, 2 chairs, and an old wood stove. It would do for now. He set his backpack down and checked the corners. Max sniffed around, tail still low, ears flicking at every sound outside. The girl sat on the floor, pulling the blanket tighter around her. Her eyes stayed fixed on the doorway, as if she expected something to burst through. John crouched in front of her. "All right," he said quietly. "It's time you tell me what's going on. Who's after you?" She looked down at her hands, silent for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "They are called collectors. They take children from my world, to sell, to study. Or worse." John's jaw tightened. "Why you?" he asked. Her silver eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw guilt there. "I am not normal," she said, struggling with the words. "I was born with light inside. They think it can be used for power." She pulled back the blanket and touched her chest. For a moment, a faint glow shimmered under her skin, like a soft pulse of silver. John stared. He had never seen anything like it. "They keep us in cages," she continued, "cold cages, no light, no sky. I ran away when they moved me to a new place. I thought I could hide." Her voice cracked. "But they always find me." John wanted to tell her she was safe now, but he couldn't lie, not with those lights in the woods and that strange hum chasing them. "How many?" he asked. Her eyes narrowed. Too many. But only some can come close. The others stay far. Waiting. John frowned. Waiting for what? Her answer was simple and chilling. For me to be tired enough to stop running. Before he could respond, Max's growl filled the room. The dog stood at the window, teeth bared. John grabbed the shotgun and moved beside him. Through the broken glass, he saw movement shapes slipping between the trees. Too smooth, too silent to be human. The girl's breathing quickened. They found us. She whispered. John's heart pounded. He had hoped the cabin would buy them time, but it had only made them easier to trap. A faint light began to glow outside, moving closer. It wasn't a flashlight. This light shimmered unnaturally, almost. Liquid, the girl scrambled to the far wall. Eyes wide. It's the catcher. She said, her voice shaking. If it touches me, I can't fight it. I will be pulled away. John didn't understand the technology. But he understood danger, and he wasn't about to let it happen. He opened the cabin door quietly. The cold air rushed in. Carrying the faint smell of metal, he motioned for Max to stay with the girl. Max growled low, clearly unhappy about being left behind. I'll be back, John whispered, then slipped into the night. The forest was alive with shadows. John moved from tree to tree, staying low. He spotted the source of the light, a tall machine on spider-like legs. It hummed as it scanned the ground with a beam of shifting silver. Two collector figures walked beside it, their black eyes scanning the dark. John raised the shotgun. He knew he couldn't take them all down, not without risking the girl. But maybe he could slow them. He waited until they were closer, then fired at the machine's legs. The blast echoed like thunder. Sparks flew and the catcher stumbled, one leg bending awkwardly. The two collectors spun toward the sound, letting out an inhuman hiss. John didn't wait. He ran back toward the cabin. Behind him, the hum grew louder, angry now. Branches snapped as something gave chase. He burst through the cabin door, locking it fast. The girl was standing, trembling. Go, she said urgently. We must go now before they bring more. John grabbed his backpack and nodded. Max barked once. Ready to move, they slipped out the back. Heading deeper into the woods, the hum faded behind them for a moment, but John knew it wasn't over. The collectors had found them once. They would do it again, and next time they wouldn't come with just a catcher. They would come ready for war. The night had grown even colder. John sat against the pine tree, shotgun resting across his knees. Max lay beside him, head on his paws, but eyes wide open. The alien girl was curled under the blanket, breathing softly but not asleep. Every few minutes, she would lift her head and scan the forest, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dark like tiny moons. John had been listening to the forest for hours. The wind moved the branches. Owls called in the distance, but beneath it all, there was a faint pulse in the ground, too steady to be nature. The seekers were gone. But something else was coming. He could feel it, suddenly. Max's ears shot up. He growled low, almost too low to hear. John froze, holding up a hand for silence. At first, he only heard the wind. Then came the faintest crunch of leaves, measured, slow, deliberate. The girl's eyes widened. They're here, she whispered, voice trembling. Her body tensed like she might run. But John shook his head. Not yet, he mouthed. The noise grew louder. Then, without warning, a shape moved through the trees fast and low. It stopped. Just beyond the tree line, watching them, John couldn't make out its full form, but the glint of its black eyes was unmistakable. Max barked sharply, the sound exploding into the night. The shape lunged forward. John fired. The blast lit up the forest, revealing a tall, thin figure with limbs too long for its body. The shot hit its shoulder, spinning it to the ground. But it didn't scream at all. its voice sharp and alien. The girl ducked behind the tree, clutching the blanket tight. Another hiss came from the right. John turned just as a second figure emerged. This one carried something long, metallic, glowing faintly at the tip. A weapon. Max leaped before it could raise the weapon, teeth sinking into its arm. The alien staggered, striking at the dog with its free hand. John fired again, the sound echoing. The second attacker fell. But the first one was already back on its feet, moving toward the girl. John didn't think he charged. The alien swung a clawed hand, catching his jacket and tearing the fabric. John shoved the shotgun barrel against its chest and fired at close range. The force threw the creature backward into the trees. It didn't move again. The forest went silent for a moment. Only the sound of Max's heavy breathing filled the air. The girl was still crouched behind the tree, eyes wide with fear. John knelt beside her. "You okay?" She nodded slowly, but her hands were shaking. Before they could catch their breath, a new sound broke the quiet. The low hum had returned. But now it was faster. The ground seemed to vibrate under their feet. The girl's face went pale. "There." "Bringing the catcher again," she said, "and more hunters." John knew they couldn't stay here. He grabbed the backpack and motioned for her to follow. Max stayed close, his fur bristling, ears turning at every sound. They moved quickly, through the dark, weaving between trees and staying low, but the hum was getting louder. Light began to flash between the trunk, silver and white, moving in sweeping arcs. The girl's grip on John's jacket tightened. "They'll trap us," she whispered. John glanced back. He could see at least 4 moving lights now, each coming from a different direction. They broke into a run. Branches whipped at their faces. Roots caught at their feet. The hum grew almost deafening now, joined by the sharp clicking sounds of the hunters. Max barked once, a warning, then darted ahead, leading them toward a narrow, rocky slope. The girl followed him without hesitation. John glanced over his shoulder and saw dark shapes closing in. One hunter raised its weapon. A bright bolt of energy searing past John's arm and burning the tree behind him. They reached the slope, scrambling upward. Rocks shifting under their boots. Max bounded to the top, barking furiously. John pushed the girl up first, then climbed after her. The hum below grew chaotic. The hunters trying to adjust their machines on the uneven ground from the top of the slope. John turned and fired one last time. The blast hit the ground near the lead hunter, throwing up dirt and forcing them back. It wasn't much, but it bought a few seconds, enough for them to disappear into the thick brush on the other side. They didn't stop until the hum faded again. John dropped to one knee, breathing hard. The girl knelt beside him, touching his arm gently. "You fought them," she said softly, almost like she couldn't believe it. "You didn't run away." John looked at her. "Not from family," he said. Her silver eyes glistened in the moonlight. And she whispered that word again. "Dad," this time not in fear, but with something like hope. Max leaned against them, tail thumping weakly. The forest was quiet again. For now, but John knew this was far from over. The hunters had seen his face. They had seen his resistance. They would come again stronger, faster, and more desperate. And next time, he'd have to be ready for a fight they might not walk away from. The forest was still, too still. John knew from experience that silence in the wild meant danger was nearby. Even after the attack, he didn't let himself believe they were safe, not for a second. Max patted ahead on the narrow deer trail nose. Low ears twitching, the alien girl walked close beside John, her small hand gripping his jacket. Every so often, she would glance over her shoulder, as if afraid the shadows might reach out and grab her. The night air was freezing now. Their breaths turned into mist that drifted into the darkness. Somewhere far away, an owl called, but the sound was quickly swallowed by the trees. John kept. The shotgun ready, eyes scanning for movement. The hum from the catcher machine was gone. But that didn't mean the hunters had stopped. "We need a place they can't find us," John murmured. The girl tilted her head. "There is no place like that," she said softly. "Not for me." John looked down at her. "There will be," he said firmly. "I'll make sure of it." They moved deeper into the forest. John was leading them toward a place he hadn't visited in years, a small ranger's outpost built into the side of a rocky hill. It had no electricity now, but it was made of thick timber and stone. If they could reach it before sunrise, they could rest for a few hours and plan their next move. The path narrowed, the ground sloping downward toward a frozen creek. The ice cracked softly under their boots as they crossed. Max stopped suddenly, ears pricked. A faint rustle came from the trees above the creek bank. John froze, scanning the shadows. Nothing moved, but he didn't like it. "Faster," he whispered. They hurried across the ice and scrambled up the other side. The girl slipped, and John caught her before she fell. Max was already moving again, nose working furiously. The outpost was close now. John could almost see the shape of the hill through the trees. But then a sound drifted to them from behind. Not the hum this time. Footsteps. Multiple. The girl's silver eyes went wide. "They're coming again," she whispered. John cursed under his breath. They must have been tracking them the whole time. He glanced ahead and saw the rocky slope. To the outpost, it was steep, but if they reached it first, the hunters would have to climb under fire. "Go," John urged. Max barked and sprinted up the slope, the girl following close behind. John moved backward as he climbed, keeping the shotgun aimed downhill. Figures were moving in the darkness now. Weaving between trees, he fired once, the blast lighting up the forest for a heartbeat. The hunters scattered for cover, but kept advancing. They reached the outpost, a small cabin half buried into the hill, its roof covered in snow. John shoved the door open and herded them inside. The air was stale and cold, but the thick walls muffled the outside sounds. He barred the door with an old wooden beam, then moved to the small slit windows. From here, he could see the slope and the tree line below. Max paced near the door. Tail stiff, the girl sat on the floor, pulling the blanket tight. Her voice was quiet but firm. "They will not stop. You must know that." John nodded. "Then we make it cost them," he said, checking the shotgun and the few shells he had left. Outside, faint shapes gathered at the base of the slope. They weren't rushing in this time, they were waiting. One of them raised a long, thin device. A sharp pulse of light shot upward, striking the cabin wall. John flinched. The wood smoked where it hit. "Stay away from the walls," he warned. The girl crawled to the center of the floor. Her eyes were fixed on the hunters outside. "They will try to smoke us out." "Make us run," she said. John's jaw clenched. "Then they'll get a surprise." He dug through the old storage chest in the corner and found 2 rusted flares and a coil of wire. It wasn't much, but he could make a trap, working quickly. He looped the wire near the door and rigged the flares above it. If a hunter tried to force its way in, the flares would drop and ignite, blinding them long enough for John to fire. Minutes dragged on. Outside, the hunters shifted positions, their black eyes glinting in the moonlight. John could feel the girl's gaze on him. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why do you fight for me?" "I am not yours." John looked at her. "Doesn't matter," he said simply. "You needed help, and you're here now. That makes you mine to protect." For a moment, she just stared at him. Then she nodded, almost to herself. Max gave a soft bark, drawing their attention back to the window. The hunters were moving slowly, carefully creeping up the slope. John's muscles tensed. "Stay low," he whispered. The first shadow reached the door. The old wood creaked under the weight, then crack. The flares dropped, exploding into blinding light. The hunter hissed, stumbling back. John fired through the smoke. The figure collapsed, sliding down the slope. Shouts in that strange, clicking language echoed from the others. They didn't advance. They dragged the fallen one back into the trees. Then the forest went quiet again. Too quiet. John stayed at the window, scanning the shadows. He knew this wasn't over. They hadn't retreated. They were planning their next move. And when it came, it would be worse than anything so far. The forest outside was quiet. Too quiet. John had been in enough dangerous places to know that silence wasn't peace, was preparation. Something was coming, and it was big. Max lay near the door, ears flicking every few seconds. The alien? Girl sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, eyes fixed on John. He could tell she was trying not to show fear. But her small hands trembled against the blanket. "They'll come soon," she said softly. John nodded. Loading the last shells into the shotgun, "Then we make it the last time," he said. A faint vibration began under their feet. The wood of the cabin walls gave a low groan. Max stood instantly, tail stiff. Nose pointed toward the door. Through the narrow window, John saw it, not the thin hunter shapes this time, but something larger, moving through the trees. Metal. Caught the moonlight, glinting in flashes between the trunks. The girl's voice shook. They brought a hauler. "It's for taking many." Not just me. John's stomach turned. If they had brought something like that, it meant they planned to end this in one move. No more chasing. No more traps just taking everything and leaving. The ground trembled harder. Branches snapped under the weight of the approaching machine behind it. Smaller shapes moved in formation, hunters, at least a dozen. John's grip tightened on the shotgun. He glanced at the girl. "You stay behind me, no matter what." She opened her mouth to argue, but Max nudged her side, and she closed it again. The first hunter reached the slope, moving faster than before. Then another, and another. John fired, one fell. The others kept coming. The hauler stopped at the base of the hill. It sighed, unfolding into a ramp. From the ramp poured more hunters. The clicking of their language filled the air, cold and sharp. "They want you alive." John told the girl that's their mistake. The hunters charged. John fired again. The blast lighting the night, Max lunged at one that broke through, teeth sinking deep. The girl stayed low, clutching the blanket but watching every move. Two hunters reached the door. John slammed the butt of the shotgun into one's head, sending it sprawling. The other grabbed his arm, claws scraping his skin. With a growl, Max tore it away. The air outside shimmered suddenly. A silver net of light dropped from the hauler toward the cabin roof. The girl cried out, "They're trying to trap us inside." John grabbed her hand. "Then we get out first." They bolted through the back exciton old storage hatch John had spotted earlier. The net slammed down behind them, sealing the front of the cabin in silver fire. Snow crunched under their boots as they raced into the trees. The hunters shouted, their clicking voices rising in frustration. Max led the way down a narrow animal path. John kept glancing back. Dark figures were chasing them. Closing the gap, the hum of the hauler followed, louder now. Branches snapped overhead as the machine's light swept through the forest. They reached the frozen creek. John skidded to a stop and turned. The hunters were seconds away. He raised the shotgun. 2 blasts, dropped the first wave. But the others kept coming, stepping over the fallen like they were nothing. The girl's eyes glowed brighter now. "Dad," she whispered, voice urgent, "let me help," before John could stop her. She stepped forward. The glow in her chest pulsed brighter, spilling silver light into the dark. The hunters froze for a split second, shielding their eyes. Then the light flared brighter than the moon. It rippled outward like a wave, Passing through the trees, the hunters staggered, their weapons dropping from numb fingers. The hauler's hum faltered. Lights flickering, John grabbed her before she collapsed. "What did you do?" She smiled weakly. "Light, it's not only for taking. It can push them away." Her voice dropped, but only once. "I have no more for now," Max barked sharply. The hunters were retreating, dragging their wounded, calling to each other in that harsh language. The hauler turned slowly, limping on one damaged leg. They weren't chasing anymore, they were leaving. John watched until the lights vanished into the far forest. Only then did he kneel and hug the girl close. "You scared me," he said, his voice low but firm. She rested her head against his chest. "But we are safe now," she whispered. "For now," he said, "but I'm not letting them get near you again." They walked through the quiet forest until the sky began to pale with dawn. When they reached the edge of the trees, the sun's first light touched the girl's face. Her silver eyes sparkled, and for the first time since he had met her, she smiled without fear. She slipped her small hand into his. "Dad," she said. Softly, "You didn't have to fight for me." "But you did." John squeezed her hand gently. "That's what family does," he replied. And as Max trotted ahead, tail wagging, John knew he'd fight the whole galaxy again if it meant keeping her safe.